Welcome to the video. Cultivating Therapist Charisma 2. Deliberate Practice and Dancing with the Abyss. My name is Dr. Stephen Bacon. I'm a clinical psychologist in Santa Barbara, California, and I've spent the past decade writing books and researching exactly how psychotherapy works. Deliberate practice. In addition to seeking numinous experiences, there are two other pragmatic ways to cultivate therapist charisma: deliberate practice and dancing with the abyss. Deliberate practice is a term made famous by Milton Erickson and particularly adapted for training psychotherapists by Scott Miller and his colleagues. Deliberate practice is differentiated from standard practice by its focus on the identification and remediation of one's weak points. Standard practice simply involves exercising the skill multiple times. This approach was popularized by the book Outliers, with its statement that 10,000 hours of practice makes one an expert. Deliberate practice adherents criticize this approach by pointing out that in standard practice, one continues to either avoid weak points or embed them further. In contrast, deliberate practice analyzes a skill set, finds the mistakes, and specifically redresses them. Erickson and Miller believe that this is the secret to effective practice, improvement, and becoming an actual expert. Scott Miller has operationalized these ideas and developed a model of deliberate practice that is beginning to achieve some research support. His model is tightly integrated with performance measurement and dependent on feedback and coaching. While Miller's model is both interesting and promising, this video is going to examine an alternative constructionist approach to the Miller-Erickson deliberate practice model. Constructionism and deliberate practice. Constructionism brings a different perspective to deliberate practice. Examine the following Robert Niemeyer quote. Quote, "In this view, each system of psychotherapy embodies a distinctive set of epistemological commitments ranging from core, often implicit, meta-theoretical beliefs about the nature of reality and human beings' relationship to that reality, through formal theories of human functioning and clinical theories of the nature of human distress and disorder, to therapeutic strategies and techniques. This suggests that every school of therapy has its own unique view of reality. Moreover, given that there are over 300 schools of therapy, it also suggests that these different worldviews essentially encompass most of the worldviews endorsed by clients. Of course, there aren't actually 300 distinct worldviews, in that many of these systems have meaningful overlaps with each other. How many actual distinct worldviews exist is debatable, certainly more a matter of usefulness than truth, but it is reasonable to argue that the more a therapist can master the different worldviews, the better they can succeed with client fit. Client fit requires creating all major rituals. Constructionist therapists differ from standard therapists in that they are expected to master all of the major worldviews embodied in their home culture. In terms of therapy system, this implies that constructionists are not simply eclectic, blending two or more perspectives, but they are universal, attempting to achieve a pragmatic mastery of all the relevant worldviews. As described in previous videos, this is not as daunting a task as it might seem, given that the important worldviews embodied by the major psychological systems already permeate much of Western culture. To review, that's partially why beginners match the outcomes of experts. They enter graduate school having already internalized the major psychological worldviews and their essential interventions. And from a constructionist perspective, mastery doesn't imply achieving an expertise that would be respected by the founders of each school. Rather, the constructionist is attempting to master the worldview system to the degree that the client recognizes that the therapist gets it, and the therapist can use this mastery to create effective rituals. All worldviews are not equally comfortable. Just because most new therapists arrive at graduate school with an internalized representation of many of the primary psychotherapy systems doesn't imply that they are equally facile at every approach. Since I am a unique person, some of these views are going to feel more comfortable and some will feel more foreign. If I make myself practice those that are foreign, I will enhance my ability to shift between one reality and another and be more resourceful when it comes to matching my client's needs. This follows the classic deliberate practice paradigm. Identify which areas are weakest. Using a coach supervisor for feedback, develop sufficient mastery of the area so that one can work effectively with actual clients. Practical examples. It's fairly simple to identify some of the core therapist opportunities embodied in the various worldviews, psychological systems. For example, belief in rationality and the primacy of the conscious mind over the unconscious characterizes CBT. The centrality of emotions, trauma, and catharsis runs throughout psychodynamic. Therapists who are shy about being directive should learn reality therapy, and those who fear altered states can work on Ericksonian psychotherapy or provocative therapy. And collaborative therapy even surpasses Rogerian therapy when it comes to cultivating a non-directive stance. The relational self and spirituality. Therapists who default towards a simple model of a unified internal self can expand that model by working with systems theory, ego state therapy, and internal family systems. Carl Jung not only worked with archetypes and the collective unconscious, he attempted to build models that integrated spirituality with psychotherapy. Transpersonal psychology includes aspects of shamanism, Eastern psychology, and New Age ideas. Christian psychology and even the concept of the higher power is a stretch for many therapists who draw the line at anything past humanism and science. Yet everyone knows that these spiritual ideas are both prevalent and important in the Western mind worldview. Practical and authentic. Even this partial list might sound overwhelming, yet bear in mind that the expertise we seek is different than the traditional practitioners of each of those systems. Essentially, we're seeking the ability to speak the client's language when they demonstrate a commitment to one of these worldviews. Just as importantly, we need to be able to endorse the positive aspect of each of these approaches with sincerity and authenticity. Often that is not as easy as it sounds, particularly when one encounters spiritual ideas that seem foreign, irrational, or self-deprecating. The long-term solution to this dilemma requires the constructionist therapists to have made their own pilgrimage to the abyss. At the edge of the abyss, each person has their own encounter with real versus unreal and connected versus alone. Each constructionist finds their own place to stand, a place that represents their own beliefs, and also a place that embodies their call to healing. Paradoxically, the ability to deconstruct worldviews can be conducive to authentically embracing disparate worldviews. They can all be framed as sincere attempts to embrace different aspects of an underlying truth. The inclusive stance. More specifically, it can be difficult to endorse a concept like Satan is attempting to pervert my life unless one can understand spiritual and psychological worldviews from an evolutionary perspective. Swami Vivekananda speaks to this exact point in the following quote. If a man can realize his divine nature with the help of an image, would it be right to call that a sin? Nor, even when he has passed that stage, should he call it an error. Man is not traveling from error to truth, but from truth to truth, from lower to higher truth. To him, all the religions, from the lowest fetishism to the highest absolutism, mean so many attempts of the human soul to grasp and realize the infinite, each determined by the conditions of its birth and association, and each of these marks a stage of progress. And every soul is a young eagle, soaring higher and higher, gathering more and more strength, till it reaches the glorious sun. Charisma and dancing with the abyss. Returning to the concept of the perennial philosophy, in every culture, certain members attempt to deconstruct assumptions and deprogram themselves. In the Kill the Buddha stories we have shared, the teacher is the one who is relatively free from assumptions and programming, and is attempting to guide the students to that same end. When we reject the concept that psychotherapy is like medicine and operates in fundamental reality with powerful techniques, we essentially enter a trackless space, bereft of simple landmarks. The effort to navigate this space in itself is conducive to cultivating therapist charisma. Put another way, working as a psychotherapist who sees constructive reality as progressively more fluid and more constructed, is a form of mindfulness exercise. When application of those principles with real clients results in real change, it enhances both our self-confidence as well as our charisma. Hypnosis, altered states, and constructed reality. Milton Erickson was renowned for arguing for seeing each individual as unique. In the following quote, he emphasizes the importance of the fit between the client and the intervention. More subtly, he is urging therapists to break out of their boxes and ruts and practice a kind of beginner's mind with each client. Quote, I think we should all know that every individual is unique. There are no duplicates. In the 3.5 million years that man has lived on Earth, I think I'm quite safe in saying there are no duplicate fingerprints, no duplicate individuals. Fraternal twins are very, very different in their fingerprints, their resistance to disease, their psychological structure and personality. And I do wish that Rogerian therapists, Gestalt therapists, transactional analysts, group analysts, and all the other offspring of various theories would recognize that not one of them really recognizes that psychotherapy for person number one is not psychotherapy for person number two. I treated many conditions, and I always invent a new treatment in accord with the individual personality. I know that when I take us out to dinner, I let the guests choose what they want to eat because I don't know what they like. I think people should dress the way they want to. I am very certain that all of you know that I dress the way that I want to. I think that psychotherapy is an individual procedure. The infinite possibilities of hypnosis. When Erickson and his colleagues were developing the modern view of clinical hypnosis in the 1950s, one can imagine just how free and unlimited they felt. One of my mentors in graduate school, Jack Watkins, was a co-developer of the clinical hypnosis model. When I asked him about working with Erickson, he said something like, Milton was so keen on developing hypnosis that he had a kind of obsession with it. It was somewhat irritating to eat breakfast with him and realize that much of his conversation consisted of embedded suggestions where he was trying to get me to unconsciously pass him the butter. Certainly an amusing story, but it exemplifies the excitement that Erickson and his colleagues felt about exploring the possibilities of hypnosis. In trance, things are real because you believe they are real. They were literally exploring the idea that the psyche was much more malleable and therefore more open to healing than the rest of the mental health field could possibly imagine. And they believed that their new studies and explorations were about to prove it. Altered states revealed the fluidity of reality. For these hypnotic pioneers, altered states had almost infinite potential. They were regularly practicing amnesia, post-hypnotic suggestions, habit reprogramming, and had daily experiences that their interventions were powerful and in some ways unlimited. Erickson in particular became famous for using his knowledge of altered states and the fluidity of reality to create naturalistic interventions without formal hypnotic inductions. He repeatedly demonstrated that people's hold on reality was much more tenuous and changeable than normally thought. Consider this example. I recall a demonstration Erickson once did before a large audience. He asked for a volunteer, and a young man came up and sat down with him. Erickson's only trance induction was to ask the young man to put his hands on his knees. Then he said, would you be willing to continue to see your hands on your knees? The young man said he would. Erickson gestured to a colleague on the other side of the young man, and the colleague lifted up the young man's arm, and it remained in the air. Erickson said to the young man, how many hands do you have? Two, of course. I'd like you to count them as I point to them, said Erickson. All right. Erickson pointed to the hand on one knee, and the young man said one. Erickson pointed to the vacant other knee, where the young man had agreed to see his hand, and the young man said two. Then Erickson pointed to the hand up in the air. The young man stared at it, puzzled. How do you explain that other hand? Asked Erickson. I don't know. I guess I should be in a circus. Moving from hypnosis to simply changing reality. While the young man's responsiveness was probably enhanced by the fact he was in front of an audience at a hypnosis demonstration, it still serves as an example of what is possible simply by asking a person to alter their reality. Erickson was following his own counsel and not assuming anything about limitations. In particular, he had to let go of his idea that reality is solid in order to achieve these results. And there are many other examples of thinking outside the box and altering reality in surprising ways. For example, a teacher with psychotic delusions came to him for treatment. Erickson suggested she could leave the delusions with him and he could put them in his closet and they would be incapable of bothering her in the future. She complied and reported being free of delusions and able to keep on working. When she moved to another town, she was worried the delusions would become problematic. Erickson simply suggested that she put them in manila envelopes and mail them to him. She again complied and was able to keep working and got married. Erickson clearly made the leap from expecting that hypnotic interventions could change people quickly and profoundly to exploring the concept that even in so-called normal states, clients could alter their own reality profoundly, naturally, and relatively easily. The beliefs of the hypnotist. The most important limitation of the effectiveness of a hypnotic session is not the cooperation or resistance of the client. It is the ability of the hypnotist to see altered states everywhere and to work with the one that is present. Beginning hypnotherapists use formal inductions and only see one kind of altered state as a hypnotic trance. Advanced hypnotherapists use many kinds of inductions, see many states as altered, and understand that the primary limitations on hypnotic change lie in the therapist, not the client. The advanced hypnotist strives to bring sacred space into secular space, understanding that it is only in altered states that magic is available and the client is capable of change with a word, a gesture, or an idea. Exploring constructed reality changes the explorer. In the previous video, we documented how entering sacred space creates a numinous experience that has the potential to transform the explorer. It should be clear that Erickson and his colleagues created a sense of sacred space with their early explorations of the potentials of the hypnotic trance. And it should be just as clear that the exploration of constructed reality requires entering an equivalent sacred space. Put another way, if it doesn't feel magical, you're probably missing the main point. There are many qualities to practicing psychotherapy and constructed reality that make it feel sacred. First, the constructionist therapist has secret knowledge. Standard therapists believe in techniques and client characteristics and diagnoses. The constructionist therapist operates without those guidelines and markers. Standard therapists are Apollonians who believe that reality is solid and personhood is stable. Constructionists are Dionysians who understand that essentially everything is fluid and the real problem is making things stay the same. Constructionists feel that they operate in a malleable reality which is altered by a word or a thought. Clearly, that transformability is a characteristic of sacred space, not secular space. Finally, like Erickson, constructionists are experimentalists. They attempt to create radical change, and when those predictions are fulfilled, the positive changes document the sacrality of the interaction. Dancing with the Abyss. Don Juan, the shamanic teacher of Carlos Castaneda, recommended creating a dynamic relationship with death. When you need an answer, look over your left shoulder and ask your death. Dancing with the Abyss is a similar relationship. It is experienced as the dynamic tension between operating in normal reality while simultaneously practicing deconstruction and sensing the implicit presence of the abyss. The practitioner is simultaneously exposed to the emptiness and terror of the abyss and the promise of wholeness and completion hidden within. Feeling this tension, whether it is Don Juan's awareness of death, life, or the knowledge of the presence of the abyss, is the natural result of a deep dive into constructionism. It leads to existential despair and the potential of hope and meaning. This dynamic is one of the definitions of sacred space. The therapist is simply living with this dynamic. It is the natural outcome of the full exploration of constructionism, melded with the wish to be a force for healing. Witnessing this dynamic from the client perspective, whether they understand it consciously or unconsciously, translates as an experience of therapist charisma. The Perennial Philosophy. Dancing with the abyss is a timeless idea. It is part of the Perennial Philosophy, and not surprisingly, it has been described repeatedly by mystics and teachers. Review the following quotes from Jalaluddin Rumi. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? Don't be satisfied with stories, how things have gone with others. Unfold your own myth. You are not meant for crawling, so don't. You have wings. Learn to use them and fly. The garden of the world has no limit except in your mind. Stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep.